Hey guys, and welcome to how to paint Sepsimus the Plaguesworn. So for this tutorial, originally I was going to just have it focus on just doing pale armour, treating pale armour as flesh and painting up something really cool with that, which I'm still going to do. But when I came to this model here, I realized that you really can't just focus on the armor and paint that up without really treating the rest of it. There's so many details and so many different colors and things that are going to compete with that armor that to get a good idea of how to do it and how to have it sit well with everything else, just painting it in isolation was going to be a little bit tricky. So instead you're getting an entire tutorial on how to paint this guy from start to finish, because it just makes more sense. So strap yourself in, it's going to be a long ride. I think my last tutorial on the Blight King was about 6 parts, so that's over 3 hours worth of tutorial, and this one is probably going to be no different. So he's a really beautiful model. It's just a great sculpt, really cool, and I'm glad that I've got it. And it's going to be really fun to paint it. But yeah, this tutorial is going to focus mainly on attacking that armor and getting something really cool. So but we will go through the other steps of all the other areas in the model. Yeah, so I think that's going to be cool. So what are we doing today? Well, today we're going to be working on, before we can actually get to that main section, which is the armor, we have a few smaller details that are interacting with that need to be sorted out, so at least we have some color there and finish, and namely that's the skin. There's a few areas just in the around the helmet there, and mostly around the helmet is the bit that's the tricky one. You probably want to get to that when you're dealing with models that have like hard to reach places or something that's going to be difficult later on to paint. One, you can do it in sub-assembly, but the other thing you can do is just paint that first before you do the rest. I think that'll be a good move to just get that color in there, so at least there's something there. It doesn't have to be finished, but at least get the main colors down, so we can move on. So that's probably where we're going to be beginning today. I don't think we'll get to the armor today, but we'll be definitely just resolving some of that flesh, a bit like we did in the Blight King's tutorial. So we're not going to focus heavily on the skin section in this tutorial. I'm not going to go through every single step because I've already done that with both the Blight King's tutorial and also my How to Paint Monster Flesh. Now, if I'm really good and I've learned how to do this, right now at some point there should be a little thing popping up in the top right hand corner, if I worked out how to do it, a link to go and check out the Blight King's tutorial, and that will take you through how to do the flesh. The one that I did had way more, it's that one with the big double-handed axe, and he has way more flesh area to deal with, and so you get to really see how I go about that. So yeah, but I'm still going to go through it today, but just not quite as in-depth as that one. We're going to be using the similar colors, in fact the same colors, and a lot of the same glazing methods and stuff to get a nice varied finish on your flesh. Lots of color in there, so that it helps to unify with what we're going to do on the armor, because the armor is going to be attacked like it's flesh. So we're going to be doing a lot of the same techniques, and a lot of the same colors, but as armor. And I think that's one of the great things about Chaos, is that you can really change up the material surface of a lot of your items on them. They don't have to be the traditional material, because Chaos and demons, they change things, it warps them, all kinds of things happen to a Chaos follower. So you can really play around with all of that, and one of them is armor is a big deal, and so you can do unique things on it. And just like the old stories and the old sort of Chaos stuff talks about, the warping nature of it. So we're really going to tap into that. So I'm going to set up now, and we'll get cracking on that skin. All right, so we're back. So I've set up, I've got the colors out. We have our Grimnar purple that we've been using on the last tutorial. We've got our corpse pale, and we have the grey for control. Okay, that's to help control saturation of the color over the model. And then we have our white here. So got it out, got the gradients like I've done before. So you start from your dark to your light, bringing it in, getting the colors into a nice successive set of tones that you can use, and then beginning with obviously the darker one. So this model's been undercoated black, and then we've done a very soft zenithal with the grey sear. So all from Citadel, so Games Workshop. So you get this nice soft dusting, not too much white. We want to keep a lot of the darkness for these, and that's the same that's been done with the Blight King beforehand. Sorry about that. So we're ready to go. And I've begun by putting on the base layer for the skin. So we're going a little dark because he's got a lot of interesting elements on this. They're a little different to the last one. This little back area here, which is sort of almost like some sort of tentacle or some sort of, I don't know what they call that on an insect. But anyway, they have that sort of protuberance that, is like usually has a stinger on the end or something like that, that sort of back abdomen area. And he's sort of generating something similar to that. It's pretty gross. And I think we'll probably go quite dark and purple, probably towards the bottom, a very classic sort of chaos thing. And we'll probably change color on the tentacle here as well. There's actually a lot of work to do on the skin itself to bring it out. We don't have to go all the way on the skin straight away. We just want to establish some tones and get some of the glazing in so that we don't have to come back and do that later when we're attacking the armor, just so we don't get a lot of like over painting and marks and so on the model as we go. So that's where we're at now. So now we want to start to put in those tones. So I'll bring you in for that. So I'm moving up here into this sort of mix where we've got the corpse pale, this purple, and a little bit more of the grey in this sort of mid-tone here, or dark mid-tone. That's just a little bit lighter and a bit more yellow than what we had before. And so we're trying to also contrast colours. So this has like yellow and reds in it, and we're going to probably contrast that with possibly some greens or blues, and that'll come through the glazing and that sort of thing, and have some variation. And then you're also going to get where those contrasting colours meet, you're going to get greys. So you're going to get a whole range of both subdued colours and quite vibrant contrasting colours. And you'll see that if you look at that other tutorial, you'll see in the end, the purple and the yellow sort of bounce off each other quite nicely on the skin. But then you're going to have soft areas where the colours aren't so rich and vibrant and aren't always drawing your attention. And so that's where this control, this grey comes in. You're getting to sort of put some subtlety in, which is nice, right? So we'll get this first shade, and let's start on somewhere easy that you can see. So we'll start on the back here, and this has a lot of interesting forms and shapes. We've got little round shapes and all kinds of stuff. So you're just following that, and you're trying to build up a little bit bright. I might just dull that down a little bit. Twirl your brush, get your point, and then go again. And so we're just doing these nice little feathering motions, okay, dragging it around and just creating the first layers of your shading for this. Use little dotting motions, little feathering motions, just to vary up. Very sort of, I guess, very subtle painterly approach to this. Thin color. We're not trying to hit it massively because a lot of the glazing is going to give us our saturation and our color variation and so on. So we don't have to bring that in with these tones. This is just merely to give those glazes something to work with. So I've talked about this concept before of, if you ever use Photoshop, or, you've got a camera and you put filters, or even on your phone when you're in Instagram or any of those apps that let you change something about your photo, those filters, and they'll have different color modes and stuff like that, and how it changes the photograph. Well, if you didn't have any light and dark on that, if it was all one gradient, those filters wouldn't work. So they need information, tonal information, in order to make them work effectively anyway. A lot of them would just end up like one flat white or black or gray. They wouldn't have anything interesting going on. So that's why we need to go through here and attack this, so that we can get enough variation to give those glazes something to do. So I'm going to go through and do a couple of these tones, and basically you're just working your way up through these light tones and building up a little bit of color. We're probably only going to do like 2 steps, and that should be enough, maybe 3, and that'll be enough to give the glazes something to do. All right, so let's have a look. So I've just begun building up a couple of tones here just to give it some variety, as you can see there. So we have some shadows and some lights. Now, my camera is a little bit more blown out, so it's a little bit darker than what you're seeing here, but it's, somewhere in that, lower mid range of tones. And and so probably just on certain areas now, we'll pick out a little bit more light just so we have a little bit more to work with, because glazes, contrast paints, any type of filter or very thin layer that you're going to put over the top of something is going to bring down the range of tones. So it's going to bring it more to the middle. So you want to go a little brighter than what you would normally go, and then when those glazes go on, it just knocks it back to a more realistic level across the skin or any surface that you're glazing, and you'll still have some variety. So you don't want it too dull, otherwise, as I said before, you won't get anything out of it. So we'll probably do one more little highlight. So I was using this in the middle here, so we'll bring a bit more of this corpse pale in and just make a slightly lighter tone. And this will also help bring a little bit more color into these tones, because they are relatively desaturated. So we want to add just a little bit more color in there. So something like that. Twirl off your brush. You can still use the same size brush if you want to. If you want something a little smaller for this, you can. And it's just these little nice dotty motions. And so you're just going to add a little bit more tone and light to some of these top areas. You don't even have to do the whole thing, because it's sort of hard to see here, but I've put less tonal range here because this is probably going to end up going quite dark to a dark purple. So we don't really need to worry too much about this end. And across the tentacle here, we might change that up as well. So just pick the areas that you think are going to stay in this type of skin tone, and anything that you want to change, you don't really have to bother too much with it. And so I'm just hitting all those edges of all the folds of the skin, little dotting motions and feathering motions like we've been doing, and just giving that a little bit more brightness just across the top area here where the light's going to hit it, okay, and across some of these areas. I've also added in, you can probably just see it, there's a bit of a like a liney texture that I've added in there, sort of like simulating sort of ribbed folds as the tentacle moves. It's got sort of like a slightly textured surface, and so I've just been like fanning that out around the curve all the way around, just to add a little bit of variety into that flat area. So I'm just going to go through and do a few little highlights here and there on some of these like top areas, so anywhere where the light's coming down, maybe just in the front part of that neck, and then we should be ready to do the glazing. So I'll bring you back in once that's done. All right, so let's have a look. So there we go. So we're ready for the glazing. This is the fun bit. So once you've got your skin, a couple of steps of color with a little bit of highlight on the top areas, you can see here that I haven't even bothered to do too much heavy highlighting underneath. I've kept it dark. So you're putting a bit of naturalistic lighting on this, so just on the area where the light's hitting the most, and leave the rest quite dark, especially for monster flesh skin like this. If you have a look underneath, I've only put a base tone on the area under here, because that's not going to get very much light and it's not very interesting. You're never going to look at that. We'll probably end up putting a few little touches of highlight and so on there, but not very much. That's not the main focus. We're just hitting the very raised areas, the front areas, anything that's going to really get that light, just like the zenithal is showing us, or like your hobby light. If you put your model upright like this and see where the light's hitting, it's going to tell you roughly where the light should be. And paying a bit more attention to this tentacle, which is another key feature of this model. So adding that little texture lines in, you can just start to see there now, they're there. That's going to help just to add a bit of interest to this area. But the main focal point is this, between the head and that, this type of area here is really where you're focusing on. So that's going to be the highest level of contrast, with this being secondary. And then as that draws your eye down, you come to this back area here. Now, it's a very well designed model, the way it's position, so that your eye does move around and find those areas of interest, and then back up and into this. So For the glazing, we've got our usual suspects here. We've got the yellow, the magenta, the purple, and the blue. You don't want to use a straight red. Red's a bit too... Yeah, it's not quite the right color unless you're doing very particular type of monster. A more magenta red is a little nicer, you know, something with a bit of scarlet, a bit of blue in it, basically. That's going to help, yeah, just blend and mix and sit better on skin tones, no matter what skin tone you're doing. Straight red doesn't quite have enough of that blue in it, or at least pushed towards the blue or to the purple to make it work. So yeah, this is going to be very thin coat, so I'll just bring you into the beginnings of it. I always like to start with the red, the magenta tone, because that's probably going to be the one that's on the majority, because that's simulating the blood under the surface of the skin. And so are these other tones here, but they're in more specific areas. So whereas the magenta is going to be in most places. So we get it very, very watery, you know, very transparent. Rub most of it off your brush. You don't want to smash this with a ton of... You're not like ink washing a metallic surface or doing something like that. You're doing very subtle, soft, feathering glaze motions. We're going to blend out any watermark stains and things like that. We want to try to keep it as clean as we can, and just slowly build up the color in areas we think. So, you know, it would be around these little pockmark holes, and, you know, in these sort of areas close to where it connects to another material, like here, like up in under here, we'll get that nice dark shadow going, you know, on the end here. All these little spots where the wounds are, and these little pimples and so on, you know, anywhere that looks cool. So we'll start here because this has a ton of variety in the back here. So we'll start with that. So, you know, yeah, just pop it in like this, feather it around, you know, very painterly. Just make sure that you feather out the ink wash as you go, so that you don't get too much, you know, watermark staining. By that I mean that little, you know, dried rim that you get from paint when the pigment sort of sits on the edge of the pool of liquid, and you get that sort of, you know, dried mark. We're trying to minimize that as much as possible. So we're just going to come across here and do a bunch of this, and then go through the other colors, add a bit of purple in, add a little bit of blue where you want. The blue is really good for shadows, so putting the blue in the undersides or in around edges, and then finally a little bit of yellow. And I would say the yellow is going to be where all those pimples are and all these little areas here, or anything that looks like a bony section of it. You would do the yellow for the bony areas. So this doesn't have a lot of that on it, but it does have a lot of those little pimples and stuff. And that's a really good spot for it. So I'm going to go through and do all that now, and just do a nice little collage of these colors over the surface, and I'll bring you back in once I'm done. All right, so let's have a look. So you can see now it's really coming to life. We've got lovely blues and purples. I've been going through the magentas, the blue, and then coming with a little tiny bit of purple here and there. Started to use the blue to like streak little motions down, like you know, very subtle little bits of drips and all that kind of stuff. We're not going to put in, you know, as I said on the previous tutorial, Nurgle's dribbly bits until the very end. But it's nice to start simulating a little bit of that across the surface. And so we can see now that we've got a good variety. Now you might be wondering, oh, where's the green? Because as you can see here, there's no green. I generally don't like to use green unless I'm going for something that's quite a heavily green skin or something like that, because green dominates things really quickly. So I tend to find I don't like to use that too much. So you'll find that a blue like this nightshade, because of the color that it is, it's not like a straight up like an ultramarine blue. This is a very sort of tinted blue and dark, and when that mixes with these other colors, you're going to get little spots of green anyway coming through. So when you're doing this type of flesh where the focus is in a green tone, I would probably steer away from using too much green. I think that just ends up really shifting it really fast. It's very hard to control. So whereas these, you know, magenta to blue to purple is really easy in a flesh tone that has a lot of this kind of yellow or pale colors. It just tends to work better. So that's really cool. So we've got that at a good point. Now we just I thought I'd bring it back in just for the yellows. You got to be really careful with yellow. So you got to really water it down. Get it very heavily watered down so it's very subtle. Get almost all the paint off your brush so you just got a little bit of it. And we're just going to be flicking it in to these little spots here where the little protuberances are and all that stuff. We're just going to add a little bit of yellow to that because the yellow contrasted with the purple is going to be great. It definitely is going to make it look cool. And it's just nice to have a little bit of discoloration of yellows here and there. Not just on those areas, but on others too, you can add a little bit in. And like I said, with glazing, how it intensifies and saturates color, you're going to notice some really vibrant things start happening, especially with the reds. You'll have noticed that when you dab a little bit of purple around the place, you'll notice you get this really, really interesting sort of deep, rich kind of, I don't know, it's like a fresh bruise. It's like really red and rich, and it looks really cool. It's a little hard to tell on my my camera, but you'll notice it straight away. It just starts to really shift the color. So just add some little yellows here and there where you think they'll be cool, and you can add it into the darks as well. It'll start varying that up, and you just start to see some little spots of yellow on the tops as well. If you want to like push the highlight there a little bit towards yellow, you can, just to make it seem a bit more interesting. So we can just shift it away from the pale tone there and give it a little bit more variety, which is nice too. Just, dot it around in a way that's consistent. You don't want to just have one spot. The trick with a lot of these things is have more than one spot. Usually it goes in threes, right? So if you pick one spot, do another couple just near it to help unify it a little bit. And you can see now, even now, those light areas now just popping against that purple and red, and you're getting a bit more interest there. So I'm just going to go through and finish that off, and then we'll come back and have a little chat about the armor. Okay. So let's have a look. Yeah, really cool. So you can definitely see that now, that yellow's popping out on those edges and some of the little pustules and stuff like that. And you got that deep purple in there and blues and reds. It's just really brought it to life in a very soft, subtle, easy way. This type of technique is just about relaxing in your chair, getting the model on the other hand, getting that nice little thin bit of color and just very softly going back and forth and just dabbing these little bits of color in. It's a very different sort of technique to sort of the standard ink washing and glazing that you might see, taught. This is a very soft way, but if you can, just zone out and get into that mode, you find this very relaxing and very rewarding. But this only worked because of those tones we put on first. If this had just been a flat color like you're normally taught, with ink washing, you put the color down and then you throw an ink wash on, you're not going to get anywhere near the level of interest. If you can just spend that time and put a couple of layers of shading down with your base skin tone, and build that up a bit first, and as I said, go a little brighter than you might want to, then just one step lighter, you'll notice then that as this gets knocked back, now you've got the variety and you almost don't have to do anything. And you could stop here. I mean, if you were batch painting, a bunch of models and stuff, like for instance, if you're doing, plague bearers or, demons of any sort, or you're doing 40K and you were doing, pox walkers or whatever, this type of technique would be a lot of fun to do across a whole army. You could, use these tones, build up a few on all of them, and then just go through with your glazing and just do each one, and you'll get a really lovely patchwork color of tons of rotten flesh tones and everything that Nurgle loves, and you'll be pleasing the Papa by doing that. So I think that's a really cool thing. So that's where we're going to stop it today and prepare ourselves for the armor. So I just want to talk about that quickly before we get into it. So it's going to be a very similar process. Nice, easy, simple glazing. We're going to come back to this flesh at the end, but to retouch it and highlight and blend out some of those glazes and some of the areas that didn't work as well and all that kind of stuff, and put all the final touches. But we're going to leave it now. So we've got enough color there, enough variation to help us understand what's going to go on with the armor. So the armor is we're going to be trying some of these colors here, and I think they'll be kind of interesting. So I've got two here. I don't know exactly which one we're going to use yet, but I got this Rakath Flesh and the Onrak Skin. I don't know. Anyway, we're going to have a little look at these and probably try to use these for the base tones and build up to quite a pale color. So this one's got a bit more, I guess, red in it, and this one's got a little bit more, I guess, green possibly. So we might end up going with this, but it'd be nice to throw a little bit of that in, and possibly some cream tone, like a light bone color or something like that as well. But I'll have a think about that before we get into it. But I thought I'd show you those. We're definitely going to play around with them and a few lighter tones, and we'll come in with a base. We'll definitely be using the gray as a control, because it's going to be quite pale bone-like armor, but with a hint of that flesh in there. So I want to get that sort of life in it. So it's going to have some of these colors all through it, just like we did here with the glazing. But we need to make sure it's a different color, a different variety. So we're not going to, I don't want to have anything with too much yellow in it like this, because that's going to all blend together. Then you're not going to get any kind of difference. And we want to get it a little bit brighter in places and a little bit darker, so there's more contrast across it as well. Not quite so like there's a lot of contrast there, but we want this kind of contrast, but all over the armor, and a lot brighter and more distinct from the flesh, so we get some separation. But we'll talk about that next week. That's going to be quite an involved process. Probably going to take a few weeks for us to get through that. But it should be fun. It's something I haven't really tried to attack armor as flesh. But yeah, I think it's going to be a fun challenge and something really cool by the end. I'm already loving the way that's looking. So yeah, it should be a good adventure. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Please subscribe, hit the notify button, all that kind of stuff if you liked it. At the end, there'll be an overview with the recipes, the colors we've used. Not quite as in-depth as normal for this one, but in terms of the steps for the flesh. But you know, it'll be there at the end, and a nicer pic of him so you can sort of see the flesh tones. But otherwise, yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll catch you on the next one.